Okay, here is your next video. Let's see if we can get this started. All right, so what we're going to do today is go over a history of urban planning, so you can really start getting into planning and what that is. So the learning objectives for this lesson, there's quite a bit of them. So we're going to look at the American Revolution and how that changed the approach for town planning in the U.S. We're going to look at some of the problems that early planners faced after the American Revolution and kind of look at how that changed. We're going to describe some reforms carried out to keep up with the rising population. We're going to analyze how the Plan of Chicago paved the way for modern city planning. The Plan of Chicago was really important piece of city planning. We're just going to look briefly at the effects of zoning and planning commissions. We're going to look at how regional and state planning was implemented. And we're going to look at garden cities, Ebenezer Howard's garden cities. We'll look at those. So colonial America, go way back. Let's, in our minds, let's go way back in time. Before the American Revolution, before we broke with England, municipalities had the power to control the use of land and make their own form. They could make their own decisions. So, I mean, we're talking about America when we had our colonies, you know, the original colonies settling in America. So the way we developed these towns, it was based on this European tradition. I mean, we are European colonies. So that treated the town like its own corporation. So these colonial towns had the power to shape their own pattern of development. It was like these royal decrees that would say one person is allowed to make all the decisions for how the town should be developed. So and when I talk about shaping development, the form, the pattern, this urban pattern included things like a town square. You had reasonable amounts of space in between buildings, and it was like this simple rectangular kind of grid street pattern. Those were some of the characteristics of this kind of urban pattern in colonial towns. So the legacies of this type of town planning, you can still see them today. You go to parts of New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island. I mean, we're thinking like colonial Northeast here. You can still see how these towns got started. Okay, so let's look at Savannah. Is like an example of colonial town planning. So it was on these kind of royal decrees, the land for the city was granted to one person. His name was James Oglethorpe. He had the power to plan the city however he wanted. So this picture I have for you, this map, is actually like a tourist map that you would get if you went to Savannah today, but it is the exact same thing. This was Oglethorpe's drawing. This was his plan for Savannah. So you can see things in it where it has symmetry, right? This is a nice rectangle, it's symmetrical. You've got different primary and secondary streets. I mean, that means you can see kind of like the big main thoroughfares, like the big busy streets, as opposed to the smaller streets. So it's got some different primary and secondary streets. And the provision of public open space, these are these parks. These are all the green squares, the green rectangles, this big Forsyth Park down at the bottom. So this was it. He's like wanted to make sure that there was park space in it. So that would be an example, just this map of downtown Savannah, of what colonial town planning looks like, of what the colonial towns looked like. So this is another one, William Penn's 1682 plan for Philadelphia. This is a famous one as well, but you can still see the same kind of characteristics that we're talking about, where you've got this town square, it's a nice rectangular grid, it's symmetrical, you can see the squares with little trees in them, so those are your parks and your open spaces, and then you can see all the like parcels, little rectangles, you know, they're kind of planning for these reasonable amounts of space in between buildings or houses or businesses, and then you can see like the main, it's almost like a cross, the primary streets, the big main streets, and then also these secondary streets. So it's just another kind of picture of what it looks like. So what changed after the American Revolution? Okay, so there were no more of these royal land grants, no more saying, James Oglethorpe, you, one person, has the power to control all of the land in the town. Not anymore. So we changed, and we went to our American government system that we have now, the American government structure, where political power is in the hands of the state, where local governments are creatures of the state. This is our federalism system. If any of you are not in policy classes or politics classes and you want to talk about this American structure of government more during our in-class time, we can do that. Just ask me. But really, the municipal power to control land use was diminished. So before, when the town could completely control the land, it's not the way anymore. And the Constitution, our U.S. Constitution, it contains numerous safeguards for the rights of private property. We love our private property in this country, and that's all protected by the Constitution. So in addition to kind of these structural changes of who has the political power, it's the idea of the American Revolution. It really ushered in just this new ideology, this new way of thinking, where it strengthened the claim of individualism. I mean, this is kind of like what it means to be an American, right? Individual freedoms, individual rights. It weakened the influence of hierarchy and social status authority. So what that means kind of in terms of planning is you don't have your one, like James Oglethorpe person making the entire plan anymore. So the effect on planning was that you had a less orderly process of development. I mean, it's more democratic, right? We moved to be an American democracy, but it's not as orderly, the process of development. It's not one person saying, here is your perfect street grid system, we're going to do this. So these 19th century cities, we talked before about 19th century cities in terms of urbanization, in terms of describing how planning was a reaction to the condition of 19th century cities and urbanization. But what was happening is that municipalities were growing rapidly, right? The population growth, all the factories, people moving into cities. So the towns, the cities, the municipalities, they're growing rapidly, while at the same time the government is having little control over this pattern of growth. So planning mostly ended up in the hands of the commercial elite, who ignored residential areas, particularly if those residential areas were poor, and they focused on planning for commercial and industrial growth. This is commercial and industrial. It's your businesses, your factories, your manufacturing. Think of it like the business function of a city is where the focus was. And so really what you ended up happening is you had rapid growth, population's growing, everything's growing, towns are booming. There's this kind of strong regard for the sanctity of private property. I said we love our private property. There are a lot of protections for private property rights. And what happened is you had this appeal, this lure of making quick profits from land development and speculation. So land development means like instead of leaving the land alone, leaving the park alone, doing nothing, you're going to develop it into something. And then speculation is this idea is like, oh, this looks like a nice plot of land. I can make some money off developing that into something else. So there was this kind of really appeal of making money, making quick profits from developing land. And then there was also just this feeling, just this way of thinking that commercial growth, the business economic commercial growth was the number one function of government. I think we can still see some of this happening today. So what happened to Savannah and Philadelphia? So you already saw what happened to Savannah, because the map I gave you was like the tourist map you could still get today. So like the historic district in Savannah still looks pretty much the same as the way that, I mean, it's touristy now, but it still looks the same as in terms of design, the way that James Oglethorpe laid it out. Now Philadelphia, that plan that you saw a picture of that William Penn laid out, that plan was completely overwhelmed. Philadelphia was overwhelmed. So instead of allowing all these reasonable space in between buildings, instead of having houses with these side yard setbacks, houses were built wall to wall, in block long rows. You get these row houses, these townhouses. Remind me, I'll show you a picture of what that looks like in class. So instead of the streets, the way you have the streets laid out in these blocks, well, alleyways cut through the blocks and then became row houses. See how like the density is building up? And then these public open spaces, these park spaces, they disappeared because they were turned into commercial or residential spaces. So that's kind of what happened to the original vision for Philadelphia. Oh, wow, those words are really tiny. That's okay. This is just kind of a list of some of the concerns of urban planners. Just an idea of like there's these problems, right? So, what kind of problems were planners trying to fix, and they're still trying to fix? Here's a list of them. We'll go through more of these in depth, either some through this lesson, and then we'll talk more about these throughout the semester. So their concerns, what they are worried about is sanitation and public health, the disappearing of these open spaces, these park spaces, housing quality and overcrowding, big problem. Just this idea of the ugliness and griminess of 19th century cities. We were worried about this. Traffic congestion and adequate mobility. Everything became congested around around the ports, around the rail lines, just congestion. We've talked a lot about this, the concentration of the population. Employment and fiscal problems, unemployment, I should say, and fiscal problems, these are always a concern for cities. Social justice issues, we'll talk a lot about that throughout the semester, and then environmental preservation. So I just want to use sanitation as an example, so you can see how an urban planner would get involved in something like this. So the problem in our 19th century cities were this idea, human waste. We did not have our nice little flushing toilets. Human waste was disposed of on site in a backyard septic tank or a cesspool. There was no flushing the toilet and it got carried away far, far away from where you live. We didn't have that. Drinking water, same thing. It was not like running water like we have today through our system. It was water came from wells and streams, and contamination, like that water becoming contaminated, was really common. So then these waterborne diseases like cholera, insect-borne diseases like malaria, these were not just something that made people sick, these were killers. So that would be the problem. Okay, so we're developing technology. All right, so the technology part of it is sewers at the time, if there even were any sewers, they were designed to carry off stormwater and prevent flooding. That's it. They weren't designed to carry away organic waste. And organic waste is just a nice way of saying human feces, dead rats. I mean, use your imagination about the organic waste. So over in England, I believe, they invented the water carriage sewer. So this is different. This is a bigger pipe, a bigger pipeline. It was designed so that it could carry away this organic waste that we're talking about. So there's the problem. Here's the new solution. So where does planning come in? The role of planning is that in order to build a citywide water carrier system, it required planning on like this massive scale. So that just this one aspect of the city, the idea of sanitation and sewer and water, you had to consider the city as a whole in order to put in a system like this. So they ended up doing it's called the sanitary survey, where they went and made a map. They mapped out houses. They plotted cases of contagious disease. They plotted out where there were outhouses, and this was probably like one of the first systematic data collection and mapping efforts to be seen in cities, which is pretty cool. And so that's just kind of an example for you of how urban planning is used to address a city problem. Okay, so this idea of urban open space, also a big deal to planners. This is your parks. So part of it was this idea, and it's tied into this public health. It's where parks would serve to ventilate a city. All right, so in these 19th century cities, like we knew that people were getting sick, we knew that people were dying, we didn't know all the same things that we know about diseases and how they're spread and where they come from and all that we know now. But it seemed logical to them at the time that, okay, if we have better air, kind of ventilation on a city scale, this is going to help with our disease and dying problem. So remember this name, Frederick Law Olmsted. Olmsted is a famous, a very prominent urban planner. He designed communities that had this adequate sewer and drainage plus parklands. Okay, so when you think of this name Olmsted, in your mind you can go ahead and associate him with parks, with open space. So he designed Central Park. New York Central Park was like the model of what urban open space should look like. And here's a nice picture. I really kind of like this picture. It kind of the scale of it. You can maybe kind of start to see how someone like Olmsted was thinking